had to say. And yes, this meeting is now in progress. I would like to know that's one of the advantages of technology. They can tell you whether the meeting is in progress or not. So I am grateful for that. But back to business here. I have to leave promptly at 12:30 for another engagement. So I apologize in advance for not being able to say farewell to each of you. But thank you all for coming. And I am really excited that all of this is going to be up online and available. So if you have friends, neighbors, colleagues who want to find out what we experienced here, that is going to be available online in a few days. So thank you all for coming. And Daniel, I'm turning it over to you to introduce the final panel.
Thank you. So this panel will cover developments in career and technical education, and the session chair is Jim Means. He's Education Program Specialist in the Office of Career and Technical Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And Jim actually, way back when, helped me put together this panel. So big thanks to Jim for coming to chair this event today. He's joined by Derek Niño, who's actually filling in for Mark Martin of Build Up. And thankfully, Derek, you live nearby. Mark missed several various flights. He tried to get here, could not do it. So apparently Baltimore's a tough place to get through right now. But Derek's here, so we're grateful to have him. He was in on the launch of Build Up and will be able to provide some important insights on Build Up. He's also joined by Paymon Rouhanifard, who is co-founder and CEO of Propel America. Propel seeks to give high school students skills, credentials, and networks that they need to find a job within 1 year after graduation. And then finally, we have Matthew Spinella, who's Director of Work-Based Learning and Industry Engagement at the Tennessee Department of Education. So thank you all. I'll go ahead and turn now to Jim.
Thank you very much. I was told that they were saving the best for last. So I'm not sure. A couple of other sessions suggested they were the best, but I'm confident we are. And we appreciate you sticking to the end to hear what we have to say about career and technical education. I do want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about career and tech ed. That may be a field that you don't have any direct experience with. The sessions that we've enjoyed listening to have talked a lot about choice. And CTE, again, is just another one of those choices. And I think we all can agree that, as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a whole lot of options and models and choices to provide and meet the needs of our whole citizenry in educating our youth for tomorrow. And I also we believe that the success of any one model and the value of any one model should be tied directly to how effective it is in helping those students meet their goals and be prepared for their future lives. And I think that there are some things that career and technical education can bring to students that are unique and have value as well. And just for a little education about terminology. So in my world, when I talk about career and technical education, I'm talking about something pretty specific. And it is a sequence of courses that will take students from basic to more sophisticated skill levels, that in programs that are aligned to the workforce needs of the community in which they're delivered, that are aligned to industry recognized and valued credentials, that provide opportunities for students to earn college credit while they're in their CT programs, that will give them experiences out in the real world that will prepare them for whatever career they are choosing. And in today's high schools and CT programs, we are preparing students to be things that would include what we think about as kind of traditional vocational. We're still finding students who have an interest in becoming auto techs, an area that is increasingly more sophisticated and technically driven. We have people that are wanting to work in the health field area that are interested in nursing or pre-med programs. We have students who are interested in being firefighters. I think lots of kids, you go to career fairs, you'll ask what would like to be police officers, firefighters. we have those programs in schools as well, so that when a young person graduates from high school, they can have a significant step forward to realizing a dream of being a firefighter or police officer. We're training kids in IT, in traditional business areas. We're training kids in culinary, 16 or so different career clusters with a large number of career paths that students can, excuse me, can begin to get that experience, that knowledge, and that skill while they're in high school. And I work in an area, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, that administers the Perkins Grant, which is a $1.3 billion federal program that supports these kinds of efforts across the nation. And I work specifically in some discretionary grants and national activities that are looking for identifying problems or needs and how we can creatively and innovatively meet them going forward. So we're going to talk about training kids in careers. I just wanted to, for my own benefit and add to the conversation, that part of that is also this very specific career and tech ed program that, again, maybe you've had experience with and maybe you haven't, but I wanted to share that a little bit to get us going. So Derek, tell us a little bit about the program that you represent and what you're currently doing.
First off, again, I am not in the program. That's Mark Martin, who was trapped in Baltimore for 14 hours. So he graciously ceded this time to me, and hopefully I can speak on his behalf. So I was there for the launch and development of Build Up back in 2018. Mark and I met at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where we got doctorates of education leadership. And he, from the beginning, I think was inspired by the Swiss and German models of apprenticeship, which value, identify, surface, thanks so much, Dick. Value, surface youth and their creativity and how they can contribute to society. And so with the build-up model, it takes a bit of, I think some people are familiar with the early college high school model, but what this is, it's situated in the real estate and construction sectors. In 6 years, students are able to earn a high school diploma and they are able to get an associate's degree. They are situating their classroom learning in work-based learning, rehabbing houses. Now, in those 6 years, they're also learning high quality academic core concepts, but they're applying it in the blighted houses of the Ensley neighborhood of Birmingham, Alabama. In those 6 years, if they can demonstrate pathways to the middle class, either they get a high wage job, they sign up for or move on to high quality higher education, or they start their own business. They can then own the house that they have rehabbed for a 0% mortgage. And they immediately become a homeowner and they earn passive income as a landlord. And so part of this is Mark's idea that home ownership, property, is a way into equity. And I had to read something from him because it would be borrowed words. We wrote these together, but he's refined them over 4 years of working. So Build Up strives to deliver a holistic experience that inspires compassionate local citizenry to commit to and deliver on its community's improvement and sustained vitality. An old Burundian proverb says, "That which you do for me, without me, you do to me." Outside reformers often bring reforms that are done for or even to inner city communities rather than with or alongside. This is, in essence, tells the community, you cannot fix your problems, so instead we, the outsiders, will. And he also goes on, and what undergirds this thinking is, it is our belief that poverty is a man-made condition, one that stems from acts of racism, greed, dishonesty, and self-serving behaviors. And I had to give it up for Mark, who is so very innovative, that he is bringing, he has a Donate a House program, which brings houses from surrounding communities that were going to be demolished and going to go into landfills. The people who donate get, I believe, a $50,000 tax credit. These houses are immediately better than the ones that are in the blighted neighborhoods of Birmingham. And students have something, the raw materials that they can have, take pride in. He also is thinking about, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, because he's thinking about tune-up, which would be working in the automotive industry. So the students would be able to fix their cars and get to work. So realizing that transportation is another thing we need. So that's build up in a nutshell.
I think, is my mic on? Okay, great. So I just want to begin by, we start with career and technical education. Build Up is such a unique and impactful model, and we come into this at Propel America through a different angle. And so our work and our model is premised on the fact that we believe young people, particularly those who are about to graduate high school, face a false choice of either having to forestall income and accrue debt in pursuit of a traditional degree, or they have to forestall education and mobility to get an entry-level job that doesn't lead to mobility. And so we've created a model called Jobs First Higher Education, which means for an 18 to 24-year-old, we serve up to 24-year-olds, you can attain a living wage job that leads to career mobility through both the career laddering within the employment opportunity that you're in, but also through the fact that you get college credits in our model. So via an industry recognized credential, you get roughly a semester's worth of college credits in under a year, and you're in a living wage job. And so I just want to kind of draw that distinction, particularly with career and technical education, because a lot of our students were those that either didn't have access to high quality CT programs or were not well served by those that they were within their district schools. Last thing I want to say is oftentimes the notion of a vocational education makes a lot of us, including me, feel as though it is a lesser than option and we are not holding our young people to high standards. And I know this sort of goes without saying, but I just want to acknowledge that and name it because I'm a former superintendent. I led a school district in Southern New Jersey for a number of years. And because of our administration, there's a four-year college pennant hanging in every classroom and hallway. And through that experience, I had this dawning realization that a critical mass of our students, we not only didn't serve them, well, let me say it this way, critical mass of our graduates dropped out, stopped out of traditional higher education, entered the labor market with debt and little additional earning ability. And you could argue we made the situation worse for them. And so how do we hold ourselves accountable to policies that were incredibly well-intentioned, but how can we create both and solutions that bring together both innovations and workforce development and also the belief that I think most of us hold that higher ed does unlock future earning potential and allow for upward mobility.
My name is Matthew Spinella. I'm the Director of Work-Based Learning and Industry Engagement for the Tennessee Department of Education, actually a native of New Jersey. And so, yeah, sorry, excuse me?
And I'm a native of Tennessee.
How about that? And in my role, I mean, what we do in Tennessee, we think that there are a lot of innovative things that take place and that there are some cutting edge ideas and technology, but everything really is built off of a philosophical belief that the purpose of K-12 education, which is where I work, is to allow students to recognize what it is they like, what it is that they're good at, and how to identify where those intersect and leverage them into a fulfilling career, okay? I stole that from our commissioner. That is not a unique opinion or idea of mine. It's our philosophy and it's our foundation, okay? And from there, how can we get there, okay? And to think about the classrooms where you have a college pendant, school counselors who are harping on, you're gonna go to a four-year university. Technical college is for the lesser. Community college is for the lesser. Career and tech ed is for the lesser. We take a holistic approach, okay? And we think about what the students' interests are, what their actual skills are, and how to make that happen. The only way for a student to recognize what they like is to expose them to things that are worthwhile. And that happens early on in K-12, elementary school, career awareness, career exploration. Legislatively, we have our students in early middle school taking interest and aptitude assessments, and then doing it again in early high school. In order for a student to recognize what it is that they're good at, they need to be able to read. They need to be able to write, okay? So as you can see, they kind of work hand in glove. Your traditional literacy, computational skills are necessary in order to be able to actually think critically and then understand things that you like. And so while we do a lot of reading and writing across the curriculum in career and tech ed, we also promote throughout K-12 a continuum of experiences where students are going to understand what the world outside of the classroom is like, okay? And so we have college and career across the curriculum at the same time that we have reading and writing across the curriculum to allow that student to kind of really get a good picture. If you can see it, you can be it. And then obviously, as they get older, we really emphasize, in my role specifically, an immersive work-based learning experience, be that through a registered apprenticeship program where I work with Jim very closely on, be it through an internship, be it through paid employment, part-time or full-time, or be that through a job shadow or any number of school-based enterprises. We try to break down barriers where they exist. And from there, through those immersive experiences, our students are having access to early post-secondary opportunities where in Tennessee, legislatively, they can take up to 4 college credits at no cost through dual enrollment grants. We also have a Tennessee Promise Grant where high school graduates of Tennessee have free access to technical and community colleges for 2 years outside of high school through that grant. And then we also have our Pathways to STEM Apprenticeships for High School Students grant, where we have students working hand in hand with mentors at workplaces in a registered apprenticeship program getting paid, okay? Earlier, one of our earlier speakers, Nick, I believe, spoke about co-located schools between charter and public schools. Our co-located schools are on site at an employer. We have students that manufacture, if anybody bought a Volkswagen that was manufactured in Tennessee over the past 5 years, a high school student had a hand in the manufacturing of that. Anyone who really relies on our Department of Defense to protect us with the JLTVs that they're riding out in other countries, high school students from Tennessee in Jefferson County have done the combination welding to fortify those JLTVs. We believe very strongly in the fact that students that have access to understanding what's available and recognizing that whether you go to a 4-year, 2-year, or right into the workforce, depending upon what your likes and interests are, whatever fulfills your life and gives you meaning and purpose is what you're supposed to pursue. And that's kind of the philosophy that we have. So.
Thank you. My first question I want to ask is addresses some of the barriers of which we've already mentioned, a stigma that's often associated with career and tech ed programs. And I would suggest that on Labor Day and your HVAC goes out, that the air conditioned guy is the most important person in the world, or your hot water heater springs a leak in the middle of the night, that plumber is probably the most important person. And both those people will be well compensated for the skills that they bring you and for the problem that they're helping you solve. So we know at some level that these are important jobs that young people are being prepared for, jobs that we need when we need them. And that probably could be true of any occupation. But at the same time, we still see that mentality that it isn't quite what I might aspire for my child to do. And there may be other challenges. My first question really is around policy challenges or barriers, but it could be really even broader than that you've encountered in implementing the programs that you're representing today. And so what they are, how have you addressed them, and what advice might you be able to offer to someone who is supporting a similar program?
Mm-hmm. I think, and if this is working out, the perception thing I think has to be addressed. I think when I heard Paymon and Matt talk about lesser, I think we need to get rid of that piece, because I think we assume that career means no academics. And I don't know of any, we all have careers and we all have academic acumen. So I don't know if career has become synonymous hands-on. For the last 4 years, I worked for a national nonprofit. I'm an educational consultant now, so if I say anything bad, it's on me. But that was a lot of reverse or backward mapping from the local labor market into the post-secondary environment, into the high school classroom. So what if we start thinking about CTE as more exact, efficient, and effective education? You're still going to be picking up the core reading, writing, arithmetic, and all that sort of stuff. But you are applying it now in a place, and you're developing the skills, soft, employability, hard, that will get you that career, and hopefully lead to not a career ladder, but a career lattice. I would want to inspire a student that's great at drawing to pick up a stylus and a tablet and go from watercolors to graphic design artist and be in-house at Chase. or something like that. So we need to expand this definition so there's a perception there. I think there's also a matter of funding. I think there's a matter of generational poverty. I've lived this, so this is who I am. And we need to, I think, dispel that. I like the move to use the language around low-income youth to young people experiencing poverty, because it's a condition that should be temporary.
So I would say the biggest challenge is what we've all been discussing, and I'll think about it in a slightly, or I'll talk about it in a slightly different way. So I think we need to valorize non-traditional pathways. And if we were to zoom all the way out, democracy lends permission to capitalism, and I realize that is under some greater scrutiny these days, but it's here to stay, I think. And capitalism creates a finite number of jobs. Now it's dynamic, certain sectors kind of go up and down, but like the total number of jobs is kind of relatively static. And so how do you create equitable access to those jobs that are very well paying, and or if they're not at the starting point, lead to mobility? And yes, HVAC, electricians, various jobs in healthcare that don't require bachelor's degrees do pay well. But for the most part, the lion's share of well-paying jobs or jobs that lead to mobility in our country require a bachelor's degree. And there's, I think, a lot of dialogue today about should that change and like the signaling effect of a bachelor's degree. But I just think the posterity of higher ed remains, and that's sort of central to the challenge. And that's sort of what we think about endlessly at Propel. So how can we create on-ramps and off-ramps so that a young person can lead a choice-filled life? And so if you're going down the vocational path, it should not foreclose the opportunity to either have gotten credits for the credential and the training you got on the workforce side. And those credits should be able to articulate and stack into a higher degree. And that's and this brings kind of number two here, one of the biggest challenges we see is the inability of credits to transfer from one institution to another in traditional higher ed. I would say it's like one of the great sins of higher education. It is next to impossible to do it. And I think if you're being honest, it's about a money play, because you don't give the credits, you get to charge more, and that is what it is. I think policymakers can play a role to create that flexibility. And the third thing I would say is flexibility in general. So flexibility in the way that funds are deployed. Right now, Pell has limitations in terms of can it go toward market workforce training programs. They have to be Pell eligible, and those requirements are very, very onerous. There's, going back 10 years now, push to create what they call short-term Pell for shorter-term training programs, and it never gets through Congress. And then the last thing I would say is, going back to the point about capitalism, I will never be at the front of the line to give meaningful critiques to capitalism, but I will say I do think employers can be doing more to have skin in the game, to invest in the training for entry-level jobs, because you often see sort of reimbursement programs that are flashy. They're wonderful organizations like Guild that do incredible work, but when you think about, is that commensurate to the challenge at hand, I would say it's not. And so at the end of the day, most employers are looking for a skilled and sort of ready to go trained individual to show up at their doorstep. I would say they should probably be doing a little bit more to get that person ready for the job, whether that's investment in time and energy or actual funding.
I think from a K-12 perspective, barriers include stakeholders operating in silos, as well as funding issues, as well as really just a lack of understanding. And so a lot of that kind of we try to fix, or at least we make progress toward through intentional collaborative planning, public-private, interagency, and a lot of different planning. And so in terms of operating in silos, I feel like we do a better job than some states of communicating and speaking the same language between our state agencies, as well as our public and private and nonprofits. We have intentional planning and meetings on a regular basis. And from there, that's effectively how we're able to come to an understanding, offer a robust suite of options for students. And then in terms of funding, we've done a very good job through the governor's budget of investing over $500 million for innovative school models. 2 years ago, we invested over $40 million for innovative high school models. We saw early success. We thought this was something we could replicate and scale. And then we're able, thankfully, through the commissioner and her communication with the governor to allocate over 500 million in the budget for innovative school models to break down the barriers, to eliminate those things. And just specifically, because I work in work-based learning, employers very much so are familiar with the 21 prohibited occupations in the Child Labor Act, and fail to then turn the page and see the exemptions from those prohibited occupations for minors. And without a trailblazer like a Gestamp, which manufactures the Volkswagens I spoke about earlier 5 years ago, we would never have come up with the idea to have a consultative team at the Workforce Compliance Division in our Department of Labor and Workforce Development, working hand in glove with the Department of Education, as well as chambers, as well as school districts, to inform them of what minors can do in the workplace, how to be compliant, and how to provide guidance. It's consultative, it's not punitive. And so we've been doing, over the past 18 months, a number of different outreach initiatives to increase the number of work-based learning opportunities, which again breaks down barriers when a student lacks transportation but has a paycheck. If there are funds available to use public transportation or private, Uber or Lyft to get from the work or from the school to the workplace and back, then there's more opportunity. So we think that barriers do exist. We're still working toward breaking them down, but we've done a lot of good things in terms of taking first steps.
Thank you. Picking up just a little bit about the comments about employers, brought to mind this next question. So we all have a stake in this working, all of us. So and you begin to think about who the stakeholders are in that. They are employers, their government, their education, and their families. So what are actions that those stakeholders could take or should be taking to help support initiatives or programs that you're offering so that our young people are better prepared for their future? Let's start.
Is that specific to employers or?
No, I was talking about just stakeholders. Your comment about employers just brought to mind, but the stakeholders that all have skin in this game, someone said. So what are things that employers, the government, education, and families can do or should be doing to help support initiatives or help us move forward in this work and getting young people prepared for their careers? Are there challenges that you see, or?
I don't want to dominate. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I'll share. My opinion, stakeholders can obviously articulate what is most important for a successful career in their industry sector. And then everyone plays a role in that. Students need to self-assess where their deficiencies are, where their strengths are, how to what remediation is necessary to thrive in their industry of choice. It starts with employers being vocal about, this is what we see. These are the gaps that we can identify. These are proven training strategies that we use. How can we allow this to, how can we penetrate the elementary, middle, and high school space, as well as your post-secondary space, to cultivate these skills that are currently lacking? And that's the biggest challenge, is communication, and then thinking through how to actually put together a training program or an educational program to target the deficiencies. So yeah, I mean, if your question was really about how can everybody play a role, it's be communicative, recognize what needs to be improved, and then take actions where I hate to go back to my original point, but no longer operate in silos, recognize what role you play and what action steps are needed to hopefully overcome the obstacles, if that makes sense.
I'll just quickly tick through the critical stakeholders we work with and sort of what we've experienced and what could change. So high schools today, still for the most part, there's a compliance orientation to graduate a student. And so to get the credits, pass the MCAS here in Massachusetts or whatever the equivalent is in other states, and move them out. And so until the incentives change, be it through accountability, funding, et cetera, for there to be a greater focus on having a post-secondary plan, that remains a fundamental challenge. And I would just argue, as a country, we stink at helping young people build a structured transition from high school to life after high school. And so I think the fact that high schools continue to be compliance-oriented, chief amongst the issues that we see. Higher ed, going back to the point I made earlier, there is right now sort of two types of higher ed institutions, those that are incredibly exclusive for a very good reason, like here at Harvard, and sort of that is the entry point, and then those that are the opposite, which is they chase as many students as possible, open enrollment schools to drive up revenue. And in both cases, I would argue neither is actually focused on life outcomes after graduating from that post-secondary institution. I'm not commenting about Harvard specifically, but I can tell you from the community college partnerships, the four-year state college partnerships that we have at Propel, nary any of them are thinking about how to support those students and connect their, for the most part, general studies, liberal arts degrees into a job. And so I would say for higher ed to take risks and think about shorter term training programs that generate credits that articulate into their higher degrees would be incredible. For them to give prior learning credit for work experiences for students who enroll would be incredible. We don't see that across the board. There are some exceptions, some really innovative institutions like National Louis University in Chicago, which is a kind of traditional four-year institution that's now gone and created credential through bachelor's degree programs. There's some really cool programs out there, but they are the exceptions and not the rule. And then the last piece I would say, I've already spoken about the employer side, so I won't say that again, but I want to re-stress the importance of just greater flexibility from policymakers. For the most part, the policies are still geared toward traditional higher ed. And so at the state level, when you have last dollar programs, they rarely touch workforce training. And again, Pell does not create the flexibility I think we need. It'd be great to have more money too, but I'll just start with, let's just create some flexibility before we even get into like increasing Pell.
Yeah, I'm synthesizing what both of you said. I think those are spot on. And then I think about where Build Up is operating in Ensley. When it was launched, the only other option was a high school where only 1% of the students were graduating as college or career ready. And I would say 97 or 98% Black. And so in order to think about the cross-sector partnerships, the cross-agency partnerships, a lot of parents weren't there. So you did have to rely on faith-based institutions. You did have to think about involving the parents that were there, as well as local government and certainly the employers. So what does it look like then to strengthen the ligature, the connection between secondary and post-secondary? How do you blur the line between those? How do you start to involve the employers and make the employers or have the employers as a, to your point, Matt, that classroom, that co-located place? So I think that part of that is the community becomes a living lab. And I think that that's happening in Build Up. You can actually see manifest houses going up, and houses, if you go on Facebook and look at Build Up, you'll see houses going down the street at 10 or 11 at night. So that is, you have to tap into all the resources, wrap around holistic in a place that's blighted.
Over the last day or so, we've talked a lot about, or mentioned several times about how the last 24 months has forced us all to change the way we work and live. And certainly it impacts this area as well. I was a CT director in school district when the central office called and said, the kids aren't coming back tomorrow, find a way to teach welding with teams. And so, you know, we all have lived through that in whatever version of that story that we encountered. So my question is, are there lessons? I'm sure there are, but what have we learned the last 24 months that if you had the ability to reinvent, re-envision, or do what you want to help people, young people, be better prepared for their careers, what would that look like for you, either in the program that you have now, or scaling up, or even a new idea? What would you like to see happen that would make something good come out of the last 24 months, which would be pretty rough for everyone? Who would like to start?
I would offer that it's probably been closer to 6 years that we've been having to think about different things. I don't know what happened 6 years ago, but I think the vision, if we're thinking about the future and lessons learned, need to incorporate student identity, community identity. What do you want? What would be fulfilling? And I think it's becoming tougher in an anti-CRT, identity suppressing, social emotional learning. We need to say that actually in whispers now. And I think in a place like Ensley, you need to know where you came from. And Build Up has, as part of the curriculum, financial literacy, because if you happen upon, and this is what a wonderful opportunity, that in 6 years I can own a house, I can have a 0% mortgage. Think about mortgage rates now. And I can have passive income as a landlord. That's huge. How do I handle that money? There's also because of the flexibility that Build Up has, it has Black in Birmingham. The students know where they're coming from. They have a sense of, this is what is important to me, to my ancestors, and going forward, what I can bring to the job. I think it's also important to take into consideration on a practical level, the local economy. What are the jobs that are locally, and how do you build toward those?
The question is sort of like blue sky.
A
like-
little bit,
yeah.
not so blue sky that we can't relate to it, but yeah.
Right. I mean, I feel like there's so much we could all say about what we would like to change. So for instance, I think meaningful post-secondary planning should really start 7th and 8th grade, not 10th grade. So like, how do you build that into curriculum and school development and school models? But I'll actually say something a little bit different. I think it would be wonderful if the private sector thought more intentionally, and I think the current labor market is forcing them to do this now for what it's worth, but thought more intentionally about career laddering. Because you have a lot of industries where there's entry-level jobs, which are right now very well paying. So look at behavioral health, for instance. There's a job called registered behavioral technician, which requires about 2 weeks of training. And you're getting paid about $20 to $23 an hour. But the next rung on the ladder, if you're working at one of these big behavioral health companies like Bayada Home Healthcare, is it's like a chasm. You need a master's degree to get that next job in the organization. So 2 weeks of training, master's degree, you're probably not going to be inspired to stay there longer. And so how can we create those intermediate rungs, and we have a lot of conversations with CEOs of our partner companies. If you actually build those positions, you can reduce your turnover related costs that you're experiencing right now. Give folks a reason to stay an extra 6 months to a year to get a job that, whether it's an associate's degree or something even before an associate's degree, in between 2 weeks of training and 2 years of training, and give them an incremental wage boost. And so I think there's a way to do that, by the way, with markets. It doesn't need to be through unions. You can do it through unions too, of course, but there's a way to do it that I think does reduce turnover related costs and helps young people climb the ladder.
In terms of lessons learned and things that you might want to change, mostly comes through, I guess, additional planning and outreach, for lack of a better term. To piggyback on what we just heard, not only should we really think in K-12 space about allowing those students to recognize the things that they're good at and want, but to actually create imaging, be it through, and I can't explain it very well, aside from just the same way that curriculum maps exist, why do we not have tangible career arc maps? And something along those lines that where the 2-week training position, this position, well, there are also 4 or 5 different avenues you can take to get there. And for an infographic or graphic resource or organizer to show the students the on-ramps and off-ramps, the different options they have to get from where they are to where they want to be, that's a planning tool that I think we could have done better. And then in terms of messaging, it's very important that we have people understand, especially like the key stakeholders that are not at the table, that they're valued. Extending the invitations. Sure, we may not be working at 100% capacity just yet. Well, in that time, I'm sure you have things that you got on your mind. Why don't you tell us what those things are and extend the scope of our network so that we can really factor in all of their feedback. So those are the 2 things that I think we could have changed. And I think we have time to do them now. I just wish we could have done them earlier.
Great, thank you. We'll have one more question prepared, and then in the audience or online, but thinking about questions you might like to ask the panelists. And we've touched a little bit about the importance of all the skills, reading and writing we've mentioned. But my question is, what specific leadership or employability skills do you think students need to be successful? Where are you seeing gaps in those skills with the young people you're working with? And then how can students best demonstrate those skills to employers when seeking opportunities in the future?
The last part of that was how can they demonstrate the skills?
That was the last part, yeah. So what are those skills? Where are the gaps? And how can young people demonstrate those skills that once they have them to realize their career goals?
We have a ready graduate indicator in the state of Tennessee that really focuses on students' well-roundedness, in addition to having the credits to pass and earn a high school diploma. Schools are measured on the percentage of students that are considered ready graduates, be that through a 21 on the ACT or something like an early post-secondary opportunity, industry credentials, and such. So well-roundedness is first. Likewise, within the work that I'm just going to pat myself on the back, even though I didn't write the course standards. There was a survey conducted before our course standards were first written. Nationally, did a lot of research on what employability skills employers are seeking most, and those included thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, cultural and global competence, effective communication, planning, and self-reflection, right? So those are just 6 of, and we have 16 standards for the course. What those are look differently in all kinds of across industry sectors. And so one of the requirements of a course of a student participating in work-based learning is to actually produce not only a personalized learning plan packet, but also a portfolio of artifacts that demonstrate mastery of those core competencies. And what it looks like for the students that are working at Oshkosh Defense Corporation is far different from the students that are working as IT generalists at the Co. in Southwest Tennessee, depending upon the work. And so we do extensive training for our teachers on how a student should compose his or her own portfolio, and likewise, what the portfolio can include. And so how to be able to reach students across different disciplines. So I feel like some of the research that we did, we may want to redo some, maybe those have changed since the standards were written. But the portfolio component where students create their own websites, make their own podcasts, have their own YouTube channels, those are things that interest them. So they'll naturally gravitate toward doing those things. And likewise, reflective writing and such, but the portfolio is of great importance, I think.
I'll just quickly say, I think from an employer standpoint, there's fairly broad consensus on this sort of skills, competencies, and mindsets they want to see in entry-level positions. And so I just want to say that because we don't see a lot of debate over what they are. There is, I think, a gap in assessing those competencies and mindsets and skills leading up to hiring. And there's some innovative solutions that are playing out in the market right now, but we experience that as a pain point. You know, for us in our program, we have 4: confidence, competence, commitment, and collaboration. So confidence is knowing who you are and your strengths and your aptitudes and leaning into those and having awareness of where you have certain gaps and vulnerabilities, but not having a deficit mindset of it, but more just being cognizant. Competence is more about the technical skills you need for the job and problem solving, which is a very nebulous thing, but that is chief amongst what most employers are looking for. Commitment is follow through and holding high expectations of yourself. And collaboration is teamwork. I would say where we see gaps, problem solving, again, super nebulous, but it does come up and it speaks to just the complexity of education and everything that transpired before they wound up in that job and the importance of that well-rounded experience. And then collaboration at times has been challenging. Now we by virtue of serving a younger student population, oftentimes, you know, a 19-year-old is going to get compared to the 35-year-old at that same entry-level job. And so that sort of social maturity, the ability to kind of be a strong teammate and know how to collaborate can be a little bit tricky for a younger person. They need a few reps in life before they get that.
I go back again to the local labor market. I think it was 2014, 2016, a Pew study showed that most people don't really move too far from home. And so thinking about the local labor market, if you're obviously, if you're looking for work, you're going to travel to work. But you know, if you're not moving too far from home, then you also have to think about the different. It's not monolithic. I do a lot of work in the Central Valley, which is of California, which is agricultural. I've worked deeply in New Mexico, which is rural and frontier. Then there are the inner city youth, and then we have an urban environment in Birmingham. And so I think I want to start with the demonstration piece, where if you had employers deeply involved, they could vet and they would say, we know that these students that we helped to train, to I don't want to say cultivate, but you know, to help in the particular industry, they would know. And I think going back to the Swiss and German model, there's more of a sense of collaboration, that there's the industry that is growing as opposed to just the particular business. I think also that the thing about CTE is that if you have portable stackable credentials, you can within a matter of months demonstrate your acumen. I think that's the thing about CTE is you don't have to wait to get the diploma. And I don't know whether or not grades are necessarily going to be are held in high regard as those credentials. So I think that there's an opportunity there. And then the gaps, I think, would be there are technological gaps that need to be addressed. We heard that in the previous. A sense of self in terms of confidence. I think the person that needs it is showing up. If you are somebody from a low-income family experiencing poverty, you might not have a role model. And so there are certain things that the employer and the cross agencies and the cross sector partnerships, I think, could help to fill in some of those gaps.
You have a question?
So my question for the panel is about licensing. It seems to me that we've got a lot of regulations out there that interfere with what you're trying to accomplish, starting with the law that says you cannot work before the age of whatever, and or you can only do certain kinds of work. And so that was all well-meaning in the 19th century when those laws were enacted, but seem hopelessly out of date. But then we have all of these occupational licensing interventions that prevent you from moving up the ladder unless you go off and get a master's degree in something. And the master's degrees, the universities love this, by the way. They just love to hand out credentials, because if you hand out credentials, you don't have to teach anybody anything. They just have to take your courses, pass them, and then you collect the money and they can get the job. So I think they're just probably the most counterproductive element in this system. Is there any way I suppose we need a credential for medical doctors. I don't think we need one for attorneys, but let them win in the courtroom as the best they can. So what is your, what's your?
So it's only fair to recognize that there are industry standards across different disciplines. So in terms of what you might want to do if you want to become, like, for example, through industrial maintenance and eventually become some sort of engineer, there is an educational and a job component to that, and a pretty well established registered apprenticeship pathway that are stackable and portable, some of which include post-secondary education and some of which don't. Allowing lawyers to determine what skills they want in unregulated, not unregulated, excuse me, allowing employers to determine what they need, depending upon policies, legislation, and other existing requirements. I mean, you sometimes have to operate within the confines of what is there. No one's going to, cheat the system and get away with it for very long. So I don't know in terms of the licensing barriers that exist, but if it is a matter of paying for tuition to earn a credential that is required, I feel that the way to overcome that is to provide opportunities for funding to subsidize the costs and time and wraparound services for those that are trying to move up the ladder and have other needs such as childcare or, counseling and other things. So it's really, I don't know that that's something that certain agencies would play a role in, but supporting is really what's most important given the requirements. If that makes sense.
I'll come at this from the perspective of healthcare, which is our focus area at Propel. And it is striking, obviously healthcare is a highly regulated industry, some positions for good reason, but it is striking for entry-level jobs. You have these industry recognized norms where the employers have a point of view on what the training should look like, and then enter the State Department of Health. And it's just like a whole nother level of requirements. And it is almost impossible for us to serve young people in California. It is next to impossible for us to serve them here in Massachusetts because of these requirements. So Pell has, as I mentioned earlier, onerous requirements, and the training programs end up being 16 weeks to be, for example, a certified medical assistant, when you could easily do that in 8 weeks. Like, we see high quality, for-profit, non-accredited training programs that are getting better results than the accredited ones at half the amount of time that aren't eligible for Pell. But then you've got, so we're in Louisiana, and we have a presence in New Jersey, which is not as regulated as Massachusetts. And it is just unbelievable, the gap in terms of the requirements. And it leads training programs, whether market rate or university ones, to not want to participate in states where they have to have extra accreditation and the program needs to be even longer than Pell requires. It is incredibly inefficient. And so whether you sort of ideologically are aligned to Professor Peterson's question, there are excesses that I think almost everyone in this room, irrespective of ideology, would agree with. I would like to posit.
Back in 1999, Florida Governor Jeb Bush passed a program to give high schools credit, some extra money for students either passing an AP exam with a passing grade or earning a certificate in a high demand professional sort. Gave the same amount of money for both. And if you look at the data today, I think this is criminally underrated, but a majority of Florida high school graduates have done one or both of these things, right? And it's the both of these things that I find fascinating. Some of us go on to certain types of careers, but like, I personally would have been better off if I'd have been able to know like whether my mechanic was fleecing me or not, because if I can understand what he was talking about or something, right? These things are not mutually exclusive, right? Like, you can earn a certification and go to college, and and it might just all kind of blend together somehow. My question is that Governor Bush actually told me that he actually wanted to give the money to individual students, and the Florida legislature wouldn't go along with it. But I'm wondering if what you think about that in terms of what Governor Bush basically did was to incentivize the supply side, and it worked. But what if we did something really crazy and incentivize the demand side as well?
If I was a student, I would pursue them. That's, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of gets at it.
Good.
Matthew, I've got a question for you. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, by the way.
Hey,
Can you see a place alongside your career and technical education for free online courses that confer college credit with credit-bearing exams and tests that would give the students in the program the opportunity or the alternative to earn college credit for free while they pursue this, and to give them a degree of flexibility they may not have necessarily at a community college?
pretty glad you brought that up. So are you speaking about high school students for dual enrollment or just anyone in a post-secondary system?
Yes.
Either. Okay, both. Great. Fantastic. So I will say that if it is accredited, it qualifies through dual enrollment give, promise, reconnect. That is my understanding. And since early 2000, asynchronous virtual learning has expanded greatly. To touch upon specifically, I think Jim brought this up before as a CTE director, whether or not we can award credit for welding asynchronous virtually, it's evolving. There are simulators, right? I mean, lab simulator, there are simulators for a lot of these things. And so if it becomes accredited and it's valued according to the existing funding, that is taking place. And that is in fact how we have, I will speak so highly of the Gaston program in Tennessee. 5 years ago, they took students who were credit deficient, emotional behavioral issues, at risk, not on track to graduate, put them in a position to take ownership of their education through asynchronous virtual learning in an online learning lab, in the classroom existing at the business, supporting them with adults who probably experienced the same thing. The folks who work in production probably felt the same way about school, and those became their mentors. And then they brought teachers in to help the students say, you can do this. Where do you need help? I will help you. And then they went into a work environment where they got paid $12 an hour, and by graduation, $16 an hour, working 20 to 40 hours per week, making more than their parents, helping keep the lights on because of asynchronous virtual learning. So I really had to make sure that I got the plug in for the work-based. It has nothing to do with your question, but yeah, that's an awesome thing that we have in Tennessee too. But if it's credit bearing and accredited, we can do it.
Hey, Matthew.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool.
So one of the things we've talked about is, one of the problems education is a two-tiered nature to it, right? There's sort of college is success, and then vocational is seen, perceived as sort of secondary. And I think one of the reasons for this, because employers are increasing the number of, like the requirements for jobs that have a bachelor's degree, just enter them, right? So we can create these pathways, other things, and they can sort of be dead ends, right? If we mentioned, Volkswagen, I bet you they can build apprenticeship programs with the factory floor, but if you want to move up in the corporate ladder, you're going to need a degree somewhere, right? And so I wonder, thinking through from the CTE angle, right, our roles in this space, whether it's K-12 or post-secondary, how can we help engage employers, or what's the how part of that? Like, if that's a problem, how can we help them or kind of lead them to rethink these requirements, actually hire people and look at talent based on what they can actually do, right? So if we're teaching building skilled pathways, those are recognized, right? And we're not building, we'll say, sort of pathways that are ultimately dead ends.
I guess I'm hearing that career and technical education and academic education, there's this dichotomy. I don't think that there is. All education leads to a career. It's either you're starting in 9th grade, you could even start back in kindergarten and 3rd grade with maker spaces and career awareness and career exploration. And then you can go off and have your PhD, and you'll then go get your career. So you're going to get a career at some point. And I think, is it a matter of perception of the students themselves, the institutions that are conferring the credentials, the certificates, and the badges? So if we have a vetted, trusted institution that is conferring to 11th and 12th graders certificates and credentials of value, will employers come along? Do we also need somebody in a person, an intermediate, a spokesperson within the employer, within the industry, that speaks student, that understands student neuroscience, that understands that students will go back and forth and vacillate and haven't made up their minds. They can have AP, they can have CTE, and CTE isn't you're locked in. You can have participators, concentrators, and completers, and so you can have a sense of, I like this and I don't like this. So I'm wondering, back to your question, it's provocative because it should be K through 16 education. Somewhere along the way, you're going to have an off ramp or an on ramp to back into education or off into a career. So maybe we need to rethink, and we had to think about who's vetting and who is conferring and saying you are ready, because I'm older and I'm not ready. And I'm still thinking through my career. And I think that there are some amazing 16-year-olds who have these skills, and they are possibly career ready, maybe not their last, but at least their first.
Reach the end of our.
We also have some boxed lunches for you guys outside. Please help yourselves.
Thank you all. Thank you.